Welcome to the Sheldon Theater, and I am Ann Robertson, chair of the Philip S. Duff Jr. Endowment Fund. We're treating this as our inaugural Duff Civic Lecture Series, and our partners this evening, who are graciously agreed to help us launch this, are a Rural Voice through the Minnesota Initiative Funds, and Red Wing Community Education, who provided our programs for this evening. Please be engaged. That's what this is all about. Really look forward to a wonderful evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim Penny.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. Great to be in Red Wing. Some of you may know, most of you probably don't know, that my day job nowadays is the president of the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. 3 years ago, the Initiative Foundations, 6 of them that cover all of rural Minnesota, decided to join together to elevate the rural voice on issues that are important to the future of our state. In my case, my foundation expends about $6 million annually in 3 buckets, a couple million in early childhood needs here in our 20-county region in South Central Southeast, about $2 million in entrepreneur and business startups, and a couple million that we reserve for the smaller towns in the region. So we really believe in the future of rural Minnesota, but we also believe that it's important to have conversations in rural, and we have the good fortune that in addition to Bremer Trust and in addition to the Duff Foundation, we have Minnesota Public Radio aligned with us, so every one of these events is going to be broadcast on public radio, which then gives us a statewide audience about the issues that we discuss, the opportunities, the challenges, the solutions we bring forward. So we've covered topics from housing to mental health to rural health care to early childhood entrepreneurship. The list goes on, but civic engagement is at the heart of it. If there's anything we pride ourselves on at our Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, it's that we collaborate. We partner, we work together with other groups and organizations that are investing in the same issues that we have identified that are important to the future of Southern Minnesota. And collaboration starts with community engagement. And so tonight's conversation is about how to resurrect, how to strengthen commitment and civic engagement at the local level. And so I'm delighted to turn the microphone over to Kerri Miller and Brian Klaas.
Welcome, everyone. It's really nice to have you here. The lights are still a little bright, Russell. I can't see people in the audience, and I want to. Thank you so much for turning out and showing up and being ready to talk. As soon as Brian and I have had our conversation, I'll be down in the audience with a microphone, and I'll be walking around, and I've got some questions, and I'll want to hear what you think of some of what we've said and some of what's on your mind. So, I'm Kerri Miller. This is Rural Voice, conversations that bring imagination and creative problem solving to challenges in rural communities. We are grateful to the Initiative Foundations of Minnesota, the Duff Family Foundation, Otto Bremer Trust, and Minnesota Public Radio for their support. Tonight, we're in Red Wing at the Sheldon Theater to talk about how we build a new spirit of civic engagement. How do we restore trust in civic institutions and nurture a renewed sense of possibility in a shared future? What's the responsibility of we, the citizens, to that civic commitment? So this is such complicated and necessary work that for the first part of our time together, we've departed a bit from our usual Rural Voice format of plunging right into a town hall conversation. Instead, we've invited a guest to get the wheels turning with some context and some straight talk. Then I'll be in the audience with a microphone and some questions. I want to hear what it is, and you can start thinking about this now, what it is that diminished your faith in government, schools, maybe your church, your overall community. And then let's figure out together how to make sure that our differences enliven our communities, not divide them, because we need each other. Brian Klaas is just the kind of big thinker for a task like this. He's a political scientist, an associate professor of global politics at University College London, and a writer. His books, which you can buy in the lobby after the town hall, include Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. He grew up in Minnesota. He graduated from Carleton College. Please give him a warm Red Wing welcome.
Thank you.
Brian, I think you're perfect for this because you wrote a book about power, and that's where I want to start, because I think the loss of faith in our civic institutions goes hand in hand with this sense of disempowerment. Our institutions, people believe, can't affect change. We can't change those institutions. We can't influence one another. Reflect for a bit on how this sense of disempowerment has taken hold and how we turn that around.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kerri. I think this is a problem that is at the core of every other problem with our democracy. And when I talk to audiences anywhere around the world, I often will ask them the question of, if you could trade places with a member of Congress or a member of Parliament, and you take their job for the rest of your life and they take your job for the rest of their life, would you make that swap? And very few people raise their hand when I ask that question, which I think is a sign, as a canary in the coal mine, for the fact that we have begun to believe that politics is such a cesspool and institutions are so rigid and unchangeable that why would we want to engage in this? Why would we want to have this life, which is so difficult? And that's a really bad sign for a community, right? To have this notion that the people who are the change makers and the leaders are actually living a very difficult personal life in some ways, because you have to become part of the cesspool, right? Now, I also think that one of the things that I've appreciated about my understanding of this world is that I study authoritarian regimes around the world. And when I look at those places, I see people who are absolutely craving what we have.
Really?
Not because America is functional, right? America has many problems, but because America has the hope of change. And that's what democracy is all about. It has the opportunity for ordinary people to write a different future. And billions and billions of people around the world don't have that. So you have this moment where we have extreme jaded feelings around disempowerment, lack of hope and opportunity in the sort of moment we're in a divisive, polarized world. And yet we still have this fundamental gift that is so precious, which is the ability for communities to come together and develop change and write a better future, and that's what we have to do.
What I think has happened, and maybe we'll hear more about this when we get out into the audience, is to write the new story, you have to see yourself in some ways in the story. Yeah. And I feel like what we hear in a lot of different ways is a narrative that says, I don't see myself there. I can't imagine that my voice can shape and influence the story. And I guess I'd like you to talk a little bit about how we got there.
Yeah, so I think power feels further away than it ever has before to most Americans.
Okay, that is, I believe that, and I think that's surprising, because most of us, we know Tim Penny. Tim Penny came back to his district when he was in Washington. We might meet up with Tim Walz in a grocery store. These people are not gods on some Olympus. We might have some experience with them. So why does it feel so far away?
Because power is not just about political leaders in the community. Power is about things where you feel like you have an influence over your life. And when something goes wrong in modern life, what do? You call a call center. You don't talk to the person in the local community, right? And the call center puts you on hold for an hour, and then you get disconnected, and you're talking to somebody in, if you're lucky, a different state, very often a different country. Maybe it's AI. There's often no number to call. When you think about the way that the locus of power exists in 21st century life, it is not in the community shop.
Right.
It is not in the community organization increasingly for the things that really dictate our outcomes in our lives. People used to go to the bank the local bank to determine whether they would be able to get a mortgage. Now it's an algorithm. So you have these changes that have sort of built up over time where I think there's a feeling that most people have of decisions are being made, and I have no idea how they're being made or who is making them. And I think when you have that feeling just sort of oppressing you in your daily life, even if you occasionally will meet a politician, it doesn't feel like you're connected to decision making. And so I think that has sort of bottled itself up, and this is where, you know, I think there's a real thirst among people around the world to have the locus of decision making come a bit closer. To have more opportunities to have your say. And I think that is, you know, fundamentally what democracy is the ability to shape decisions about how you are governed. And when those power centers drift further and further away from the local communities, that is a way of degrading democracy that is totally unrelated to political institutions. It's much more related to modern economies, global capitalism, et cetera. And I think that's something that there's just this pent-up thirst for just bringing things a little closer to home.
Yeah, I heard you observing to Tim Penny backstage that it's gratifying to be in a place like this with an audience like this, because bringing it back to the hometown, right? The community where people can actually be the change and see the change, right? If they're going to get involved, feels much, much closer than the distance that you've just been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, you know, a problem at the national level, you know, any of us, we're not going to fix the Supreme Court or change the way that the Constitution operates in a specific aspect of politics. What we can do is change our communities, and these ripple effects that I think exist at the local level are sometimes the most powerful ones. And I'll just give you, two examples of this. One of them is, I live in the United Kingdom now. I've lived there for some time. And there's a person who I really admire who had a real down on his luck moment. He lost his job, he was going through a divorce, he was a runner, and running gave him a sort of, a bit of faith in humanity. He was in a running club and so on. And as he has all these calamities befall him, he says, I'm gonna organize a 5K race for my community. And he was gonna call it Park Run. Now, it was a very simple setup, but he started it and volunteers came, and then they started to franchise it, and they slowly started to build it and build it and build it. 9 million people have now done park runs.
Oh my gosh.
There are 900 every single Saturday in the UK alone. There are some in the US. Every week, 16,000 new people compete in these. And this one guy just sort of decided to set up at his local park a few cones for a 5K that he measured, with the wheel and so on. And it's transformed, the motivation for people to get involved in volunteering. It's also transformed public health because so many more people are active as a result of this. And so when I look at that model, what I think about in local communities is what I describe as the two central ingredients. One of them is what I call the spark plug. This is the thing that gets the engine going, right? And this guy got the park run engine going. He started something. But he couldn't have done it without what I call the super citizens. And these are the people who are all around us all the time, often invisibly because they're not looking for glory or recognition or power, who are devoting their time, their expertise, their skill set to making their communities a little bit better. And you need both. But I think the thing that's amazing about stories like this is that he didn't set out to create 9 million runners. I mean, he was trying to do something in his local park. And it's those spark plugs that inspire people that then produce, the engine of change. And I think that's where, at the local community, it really is possible. And even in a really divided, hyperpolarized moment, I think most Minnesotans, most Americans just want to solve problems and make other people's lives better. I think that fundamentally, that is something that motivates most humans. And so, it's an opportunity where if the locus of power is drifted away, if you feel disempowered because of what's going on in DC, be the spark plug or be the super citizen, and you never know where it's going to end up.
I've been looking forward to this discussion with you because for, maybe a decade, we've been seeing opinion polling that tells us that there has never been such a deficit of trust of our institutions. And that can be in our schools, our churches, our government, and I don't know how to interpret, I don't know if I believe that, especially when I hear you talk about this feeling that distance means cynicism and apathy, but maybe localism means I can make a change. Tell me how to understand what Americans will say when they're asked about their trust for institutions. What do you think when you see those numbers?
Well, I see that people who have no direct experience of an institution are obviously going to distrust it when it doesn't deliver for them.
Well, okay, give me an example. What do you mean?
So, I mean, if you're talking about something in, Congress, and you've never experienced how decision-making operates in Congress, and then Congress does something that you dislike, it's very easy to have distrust in that. It's harder to have trust if you are a member of a local organization, a community group, parent-teacher association, where you're part of it and you see the people, and you sort of think, yeah, we might disagree on some stuff, but I think they're actually working towards a shared goal. And I think that's the sort of aspect of lived experience being so important for this, because when you see the sausage get made, as it were, you can understand that there can be good and bad sides to it, but you can believe and trust the process. As I say, when the locus of power disappears and goes far away, I mean, it makes complete sense to me that people have a lack of faith in an institution that they find to be shadowy, distant, and difficult to understand.
Oh, so explain what's happening with faith organizations or, your local school, because we're still seeing a lot of distrust popping up there. There are very few institutions left. I think the military stands out, where Americans will, in a larger sense, say they trust it.
Yeah, and I think this is something that is part of a deeper cultural problem that exists in 2024 America. I mean, I think there's just a seeping of polarization from politics into daily life in a way that has not been the case in previous periods in American politics. And so that aspect where everything feels political, everything feels high stakes, is something that obviously then filters through to a large part of life that didn't used to have this sort of infection of politicized, partisan division in the local group, right? So I'm not going to pretend that it's all rosy. There's serious divides that exist throughout society. What I do think, though, is that there's a few things we can do about it. One of them is the sort of ripple effects, right? And I'm going to embarrass my mom briefly, who's in the audience, because here we go. So my mom, when I was a kid, saw that there were some things that were excellent about the local public schools, but some things that could be a bit better. And so she decided to run for school board. And I remember very clearly this is my first experience of understanding both public service and the importance of getting involved and putting your hand up and saying, actually, I could do something. And this is the ripple effect for me. It's why I'm on stage now, because I got interested in politics. It became something where I understood this is a way to drive change, and it's what I devoted my career to. But of course, the other ripple effects are the things that happened around that school board, and then sharing with other school boards, here's what we did to solve this problem, and so on. And I think, today, school board members face threats.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And, real, dangerous aspects of being in public life that just didn't exist as much, in the mid-1990s, for example. And so this is where we have to sort of put these two things side by side. On the one hand, you can have individuals who create these ripples that do create genuine change. On the other hand, if we don't find a way to make it less scary, less dangerous to be in public life, then I think we have a problem, right? And when I go on national television sometimes, I occasionally get death threats. And it's the kind of stuff where, you talk to other people who appear on television and they say, yeah, welcome to the national media. This is the way it works. And so, that is a feature of a hyper-polarized environment where if that is happening, at the highest level, of course it's terrible, but, there has been problems with being in the spotlight of politics for a long time. I mean, it's something where you're going to get people, sending you horrible emails and so on. But if that filters down to the local level, at the school board level, I mean, that's something we have to fix. Because what we want to have is a world where the people who can produce change and care about the society are never weighing up, do I want my kids to get death threats versus do I want to fix the school? You want it to be something where it's effectively costless and actually empowering and rewarding to be that person that puts your hand up.
I'll tell you, one of the things that's been really rewarding and gratifying about moderating these rural voice conversations is you get into a room and I don't know if people know what other people's politics are, but they're sitting shoulder to shoulder with people and they are bringing their best selves to try to solve a problem. And I feel like the opportunity for civic spaces to do that has kind of narrowed because people say, this feels like a risk. It feels like high stakes to show up in whatever space that is and put my imagination and my commitment to work and try to solve a problem. And I guess I don't know how we lower the temperature to open civic spaces to have more of that.
Well, I'll give you one specific recommendation, and I think we should be doing this a lot more in many different areas of public life. And it's derived from something that the ancient Greeks actually did, the ancient Athenians. They had this thing called the Clariterion, which randomly allocated citizens to a citizen assembly.
That's interesting.
And what was really important about this is that if you think about volunteer organizations that allocate power, there are certain power-hungry people that even in a community organization might rise to the top because they're really ruthless and ambitious and they want to be in charge of this organization. So you still have some of the aspects of power that can be negative. If you randomly allocate people and you stick them in a room and you say, we have a specific problem we want to solve, people solve it. Right? I mean, there's a variety of different policy challenges that there are common sense solutions to, and the reason they don't get solved is A, because of partisan ideology, and B, because of power-hungry people who are worried about themselves and are not worried about the community being the ones who make the decisions. So if you do citizen assemblies, even in a consultation, even if you just randomly pick people, and this is starting to happen in other parts of the world. I mean, I got a letter in the UK where they were looking at reform of the National Health Service, and they weren't going to turn over the decision to the citizen assembly, but they said, we're randomly picking people, and we're doing a community consultation, and we want them to come up with a set of recommendations when we give them the guidance of, here's the problem, what should we do? What would you pick? And I suspect that if we took this group of people here, and we asked them to solve problems, you would. Because you're not blinded by the idea of whether the lobbyist is going to punish you or whether you're going to not get reelected. And therefore, all you care about is solving the problem. And a lot of times what we do is we allocate power, but we conflate that allocation of power with self-interest.
Okay, let me make sure we understand that, because what you said was important. We allocate power, and then we
create a system.
Okay.
We create a system where the delivery of public services is not closely related to your reelection chances.
Yes.
So, if you live in a district that is extremely red or extremely blue, you will get reelected if you never compromise, because you will never face a primary and the general election will be a cakewalk. So we've set up a system where you've actually severed one of the core ideas of democracy, which is competition. And when you have less competition in a lot of districts, I mean, I can tell you who's going to win in 90% of the House districts in the election in November. I mean, most of them are uncompetitive because of the way districts are drawn, or the fact that drawing a competitive district in rural Alabama is pretty hard. This is the kind of stuff where these are foregone conclusions. So people in those positions don't have to actually deliver public services in an effective way. They don't have to solve problems to get reelected, and they basically have an incentive not to compromise. Because if they do, they'll face a primary challenger for someone who will be more committed to that party's ideology. So we've designed structural incentives that make it not necessary for politicians to do the work of public service. And I think that is something that the citizen assembly just wipes out in one fell swoop. It says to people, you literally have one job, and there's no reward for doing it other than you solve the problem your community is facing. But we want to ask you what you would do. And I think if you gave people the resource, not financially necessarily, but just said to them, we'll give you access to the experts, we'll give you all the best information, we've got a problem. We have a couple different possibilities of how to solve it. What should we do? And not only does that produce better solutions, it produces better trust. Because now the decision is not being produced without consultation of the public. It's being produced with a joint partnership with the public. And a randomly allocated group means that it will, by definition, be representative of the community.
That sounds like a city council or a city commission you're describing, or a county commission you're describing, but we know how power works. It's almost as if we have to take power back from even the closest of councils and commissions.
Well, this is why the random aspect matters, because
Right.
I don't want to add to the cynicism we already have, but we use this phrase "power hungry" as an insult, right? If you say someone's power hungry, it's a bad thing. What it quite literally means is someone who wants power. So inevitably, positions of power are disproportionately going to be filled by people who are power hungry because they want it. And a lot of people don't want it.
You know who you are.
Yeah,
too.
I know it sounds extremely simple, but it's an observation that I think is at the core of this, is that there are a lot of people who would be excellent, and all of you know them, right? All of you know the community leaders who you'd say, gosh, if this person was in charge, they would do such a great job. And you say, hey, would you run for office? And they say, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And that's the problem. Fundamentally, that's the core of the problem. So the citizen assembly gets people like that, the salt of the earth that don't want power but actually have good ideas, and asks them what to do. And you don't even need to make the decision through the citizen assembly. You don't have to say, we will 100% respect what you say, but you're putting that out into the sort of community debate, and you're also putting pressure on the politician. Because the politician then has to decide, am I going to go against what the randomly allocated group decided? Do I really want to take on the community? And so you don't have to force it to be obligatory what they decide, but you can produce pressure. And this is the kind of stuff that I just think it's, you look at the broken systems around the world where people have lack of faith in institutions, or they're upset at the democracy's failings and so on. Well, we're not trying anything different.
Right.
So at some point, maybe we should.
A couple more things here before we go out in the audience. Your example, what's it called again, the Greek word? Claritarian?
The claritarian is the device that they use to allocate who is in the citizen assembly.
That reminds me of those independent commissions on gerrymandering that some states set up and then actually obeyed. Now, some of that got politicized too, but some of it actually worked. Is that, do you think, a good example of what you're talking about?
Yes, and especially if they're randomly chosen.
Okay.
Because I think, it is the kind of stuff where most people outside of politics just care about fair play.
Yeah, that's right.
If we were asked to draw a district map of Minnesota, all of us, we all have our partisan views. Everyone has partisan views. But you sort of start from the viewpoint of what would be the fair way to do this? And instead, what have we designed? We've designed a system where the politicians pick their voters rather than the voters picking their politicians. That doesn't seem like a very good idea, right? So you've got a system where why in the world would you ever allow political people to decide how they allocate the districts? It's the electoral foxes drawing the hen houses for themselves. It's a bizarre way of doing it, and we just sort of take it for granted, and we don't have to. That's the other beauty of democracy, is that when things are obviously broken and there's no defensible reason why something has to be this way, you can change it. It takes time, it takes community building and organizing and so on, but it's not fixed in stone. So I think this is something, and districting reform is near the top of my list of things that we can do to sort of reinvigorate democracy and make people feel more like their voice matters.
I'm a big fan of Eboo Patel's. He founded the Interfaith America in Chicago organization, Youth Corps. It's great. So he says something really interesting, I think, about civic space and how to draw more people in without it feeling so high stakes. Civic institutions don't flatten identity or demand uniformity. Rather, they highlight the power of what the participants have in common and create a space where disagreements can be discussed without violence. I think we've lost the art of that. And I want you to reflect for a minute on how to regain that, how to recapture that.
Yeah, and this is not, this is one of those things where, as a political scientist, you can talk about all these lofty ideals and reforms. At some point, you have to acknowledge this is a deep-seated problem. And it's a problem that is, there are cultural divides in America, right? There's genuinely different values in different parts of the country and different political ideologies and so on. So I'm not going to pretend that we just have, get together in a civic space and now it's kumbaya and we solve the problems, right? It's not going to work like that. What you can do is create a culture where you are ruthlessly inclusive, where you say to people...
I love the sound of that.
Well, I think
ruthlessly
it's
inclusive.
But I think it's important. I think you say to people, we have one really strong rule, which is that we respect different opinions. And we respect them insofar as they're presented in good faith and that they're presented towards a solution. And I think when you have those aspects, they're very important, right? Because there's a lot of people who are not good faith actors in politics, who are not trying to help things. They're, chaos agents and so on. But if you have these rules and you say, look, you have to insist that your opinion will be driving towards a solution, then we can actually find common ground. And we do this in so many areas of our lives. I mean, politics doesn't end up, if somebody breaks down on the side of the road, you don't ask them how they voted. You try to figure out, do you have jumper cables? And so this is the kind of stuff where we need to get back to that of focus on the solution. Most of us agree that child poverty is bad. So, we don't have to have partisan disagreements about whether it's good or bad. We have to have solutions. And this is also where the other thing that I think is important for this is we need to experiment with policy more. And the reason I say that is because what we often do when we're trying to solve a problem is we pit two people or two groups, a partisan, divide, Democrats, Republicans, whatever it is. And we say, how would you solve this problem? And then you have an argument about how I would solve the problem, and then we pick one of them, and we try their solution, and then 4 years later, we try something else. Now, what you do in the realm of science or any other aspect that's evidence-based is you try experiments. And you try things and you say, the evidence points to this being the best solution. So let's do that. And so, there's ways in which you can actually do that in public policy. There's ways in which you can do trials where you have multiple possible solutions and you randomly allocate them into different places and you see which ones work. And then, it's harder to become an ideologue when you have very clear-cut evidence that policy A reduces child poverty by 25%, and policy B does nothing or makes it worse. I mean, you look like sort of a jerk if you're advocating for policy B after the evidence comes out, right? So it's the kind of stuff where instead of just sort of pitting people together and saying this will work or that will work, let's test, let's figure it out. And I think that's stuff where, again, it's outside the box thinking from how we do policy now, but I would rather be a guinea pig that then at the end of the experiment knows what's going to fix the problem than to just have people tell me and continue to spin in the wheel, right? So
and Washington's not the place to launch those experiments. I mean,
states,
right? Cities, states,
and local communities. That's this is one of the beauties of American democracy is that we have layers, right? So you can have these sort of laboratories for policy change that can happen in Red Wing, and then they can also happen in Detroit Lakes, and then you can see which one works. And then you share ideas, and you say, hey, we tried this, and there's pretty strong evidence it worked. Do you want to try it?
Right.
That's the way that change actually occurs in a way that spreads, because you can point to evidence. And I think a lot of countries that have top-down systems don't have those laboratories because they only have one possible experiment, which is the national government.
Right.
We need to exploit the laboratories of democracy much, much more.
Which are the states.
Yes.
And cities and counties.
Yeah, anything that's below the national level can be a laboratory.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about one other thing. There has been again, a resurgence, it seems, of interest in national service, mandated national service. And I'd be interested in your thoughts between mandated and incentivized. What do you think of that idea? Does it in any way address what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have mixed feelings about this because I think there's aspects where ramping up a national mandatory service program would probably have a lot of flaws in its implementation. It would probably deploy lots of people to jobs that weren't really necessary because they don't have a perfect mix and match arrangement and so on. in an ideal world, you would just simply encourage service and see it spike. But actually, you've seen that volunteer rates are lower today than they were pre-pandemic, for example. Right. And it's something that is worrying, because you want to have people out in the community building their skill set. I think one of the best initiatives, and I'm skirting the question around mandatory service a bit, but I think one of the things that I think is a worthwhile way of thinking about how people can best serve their community is an organization that offers a model for this called Third Act. And whether you agree or disagree with the policy goals of Third Act, what it's doing is they say to people, there's a lot of retired people around the country who have very important skill sets that they've cultivated through their careers. And yes, it would be great if they decided to volunteer at a soup kitchen. We need those people, there's no question. But why don't we also exploit the expertise of people who are lawyers, and the people who worked in public health, and the people who worked in different trades, and get them to actually use their skill set that they cultivated through a lifetime of wisdom, and actually developing something unique that they could offer, and deploying them in that skill set. And I think that's the other sort of innovation that we need, is to match people with how they can best help the community. So I think that's
really on the other end of the spectrum that I was, because most
You're
of the
talking
people,
about young people.
Yeah, I mean, most of the mandated national service would happen when you're either between high school and college, or after college. But I see you saying problems with rolling it out, people going to places they wouldn't necessarily be needed. Why not look at the other end of that and get a lot of these layabout retired people to get involved? And
You're putting words in my mouth here,
who you are.
I would say. I wouldn't have put it quite like that, but I will say no. I think it's not an either or, right? My suggestion is that the Third Act model is one that you would hope to deploy as much as possible in volunteering. So it wouldn't have to be, young people might have to have, a career in which they can deploy their legal or public health expertise like somebody who's in retirement, but they will have interests. And I think if you do deploy a mandatory model, you need to find ways to ensure that the young person feels meaning in this. Because the worst thing that you can do is to force them into a volunteering capacity where they feel utterly useless. And then they don't do service for the rest of their life, right? And I think this is the kind of stuff where it's an important aspect for parents to try to encourage it in young people. Now I'm going to embarrass my dad. So my dad's also in the audience, and he took me, much to the chagrin of this Minnesota Vikings fan, on Sunday mornings into the time that the Vikings would play. As a teenager, I went to a place called the Minneapolis Crisis Nursery, where at-risk children would get taken care of for a couple days, and you could go and volunteer and help take care of the kids, reading books to them and so on. And that was my sort of initial foray into volunteering, and it was such an incredibly rewarding experience to see, not just as a 15-year-old, to see how lucky I was, right? But also to see that you can actually make a difference with something as simple as reading a book to a kid whose just entire world has blown up, and they're very scared, and they don't know why they're in this institution effectively, and they just need someone to smile and be kind to them. And that's the kind of stuff where if you do it the right way, you don't have to force people because they want to, right? And I think so my answer, I'm skirting the answer a bit because I think there's a lot of implementation problems with rolling this out in the span of a year or something like that. I think the ideal world is one in which people are exposed to volunteering at a young age, find something that they derive meaning from, and then end up devoting themselves to it out of volunteering because they want to.
You're listening to Rural Voice. It's conversations that bring imagination and creative problem solving to challenges across rural Minnesota. I'm Kerri Miller. I've been in discussion with Brian Klaas. He's a political scientist currently teaching in London. He's a hometown Minnesota boy. We're turning now to the audience for a town hall kind of discussion. So we're going to take a minute, we're going to move off the stage, and we're going to come down into the audience. I'll have a microphone, and I've got a few questions for you to think about, but we want a free-flowing discussion. So if you'll raise your hand when you want to add something to it. Let's make this lively and interesting. By the way, this conversation is going to be broadcast on Minnesota Public Radio next Tuesday. So if you want to hear yourself on the radio, now's the time, okay? All right, thank you. We'll be back in just a second. Hey, Chad, we need a microphone. There he is. All right. Brian, do you want to go? I'll stand here and I'll start here. And then you can stand over there if you want to, or wherever you want. That's good. So thanks again for everybody coming to this. This is a little different than the usual model, but I have so many questions buzzing around in my brain after talking to Brian. So I hope you've also got some observations. I'm going to start with a question. I want to know when the last time you were in a conversation with someone you disagreed with and you actually learned something you didn't know. Tell me about what happened. Can anybody think of hands? I know. Oh my gosh. Really? You haven't been in think about this, a conversation where maybe your heart started beating a little fast and you thought, this person doesn't agree with me, but they're my friend, or there's somebody in the town and I don't want to alienate them. Carol? All right. Let me, if I may, come through there. Thank you. All right, Carol, tell me about what happened. I'll hold the mic.
You remind me of my husband because we went to listen to a lot of things, and some of the things I said, well, why are we going here? We totally disagree with this. And he said, I might learn something.
Good. Yes, he's got an open mind and an open heart. Anybody else in a conversation about, wow. Okay, Brian, here's part of the problem right here. We are too worried about getting into discussions with our fellow townspeople and our friends about stuff that we don't agree with. It's better just to sit it out. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think is a very deep problem as well. And one of the reasons for that, and this is, it's going to require a long-term change, is that we no longer inhabit shared realities. Democracy at its core is something where you make compromise based on a shared sense of reality.
Right.
And if you don't agree what a problem is, you can't agree on a solution. So one of the things that I think is really important is also about exposing yourself to different information pipelines than you normally would. Because if you end up in this silo, then all of a sudden you can't compromise with anyone because you can't even talk about what you believe to be true. And in community organizations, this is one of the big benefits, is that you can agree that the church needs to be repaired and it costs this much money. You might not agree whether Donald Trump secretly won the 2020 election. So this is the kind of stuff where when you look at those issues, you have to have a shared sense of reality before you can actually engage in learning from people. And it's where information and the media and journalism is so important for exposing civic problems and making people agree that they need to be solved.
Upside and downside of the media. I'll come back to that, sir. You have a thought on this. Jerry.
Well, I had breakfast with a group of guys about 2 weeks ago, and all of a sudden we start talking about politics, and they just blew off the handle. I mean, they said they couldn't understand where I was coming from, and they just blew up.
Did somebody leave the table?
Oh yeah, they left the table.
And are you still friends?
I just know them. It's just a group of guys that come and breakfast, and I go down there once in a while, but so.
Who's had that experience where you get into, maybe it's over the Thanksgiving table, maybe it's in a circle of friends. Ma'am, I'm gonna come over there to you if I can. Thank you. This is kind of the challenge of theater seating right here. Tell me what happened, I'll hold the mic.
Oh, gosh, where do I start? No, I'm from a large family, and I'd say we're 50-50. We're evenly divided and very far apart in a lot of discussions. And yet, we share a common background, and we share common values, and we still share a lot of faith values. So it leaves me speechless. I can't really, I could give you lots of examples, but I think we all know what they probably are. They're political, they're religious, they're even economic.
So if anybody in the family needed the help, your family members that might think differently from you would be there for you, right?
I do think they would, yes, definitely. We haven't gotten, somehow we all work hard to still be a family. So we're trying really hard, but we know underneath it all that our differences are pulling us apart.
50 years ago, Brian, if you had said, we have to work really hard to be a family, that would have sounded incomprehensible, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, and this is a story, I mean, this is not unique to the United States either. There are a lot of places around the world that are feeling this pinch where, Brexit divided families in the UK as well. And I think, this is the stuff where it is those appeals to common values. It is those appeals towards solutions and so on. And, it's a funny thing for me because I'm originally a Minnesotan. I often refer to myself as a very statriotic Minnesotan because Minnesota really sticks with you your whole life when you grow up here. And when I meet people abroad and I see a Twins hat or I see a Vikings hat, we don't talk about politics, right? It's this instant connection that we actually have this shared experience. And I think it's those sorts of appeals, whether it's values, lived experience, whatever, that bring people together. It's, and that's where I think it's sort of when the vitriol comes out, it's taking that step back and remembering that actually we are all sort of working towards the same goals. We have different ideas about how to get there. And sometimes the values are fundamentally different, and you can't solve that easily. But many times when it comes to policy solutions, especially at the local level, you don't have to agree on everything about who you're going to vote for president to solve a problem with potholes or to solve a problem with your local school district. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind, that all of us sort of want, good schools for good kids, and we want to have, a better community for everyone.
I know people are going to be listening to this and thinking, what are those two smoking? Because they don't know what it's like in my family, right? Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jerry, and local community member. And I have family outside of the community in a more red area than this. That we got together over the holiday weekend, and one of the things that I try to practice in situations like that is curiosity and being prepared with good questions and wanting to learn more and not be worried about changing their opinions. And we had some very good conversations about things that we disagreed with very clearly.
I think that's the highest ideal, Brian, practicing curiosity. It is not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think this is something where I have not really encountered many Americans who have no problems with talking to at least one family member, right? And so it is very difficult, but I think that is the point. I mean, I think it is trying to figure out how do you speak to someone on their terms? How do you appeal to those shared values? And how do you, at least try to ask probing questions or philosophical questions? Because that's the other thing that I think is important is there are very often underlying values, and when you get to this bill or this specific candidate, instantly the walls go up, right? When you talk more philosophically about what do you want to achieve, Like, why do you think that this is important? What is the value that's driving this? It's easier to have those conversations because the ideals are more closely held in families than our views on an individual who's running for office. So I would say, my advice would be to back off the individual and try to ask those questions about the potential shared values that you might have.
I want to pose another question for you to think about while we're still on this. I'm interested in how you define the obligations of a citizen, and I mean that in the broad, not in the immigration debate sense. I am a citizen of a community like Red Wing. What are my obligations to my fellow citizens? So think about that as we still, yes, I'll come right back there, ma'am, but you were going to reflect on the difficulty of working against letting it all kind of blow up. You are?
My name is Fred Harding. I'm from Wisconsin. I run a performing arts center in Wabasha. My observation simply would be this: having a shared opportunity for audience members to sit and enjoy something that they may not have thought of or looked at, but enjoying it and coming away is a way to break ice, to get bridges built, to have people talking to each other in the lobby, at the refreshment stand. The fact of the matter is that sort of thing, by bringing things in that they wouldn't normally see or do, attracts interested people, and they end up talking to each other. It's a great way to facilitate that.
We did not plant Fred, but he is he's articulating exactly what we're doing here, Chad, so mission accomplished. Okay, thank you. Anybody who would like one more thought on that? Yes, sir, and then we're coming to the citizen part of this. Yes, sir.
My name is Scott, and I'm a local citizen. And one of the things that strikes me about what we've been talking about this evening is that if it's a smaller issue, let's say it's the education system, let's say it's arts and culture in a community, whatever it happens to be, I suspect it's a bit easier to get in a group and learn from each other. What I worry about is the larger stage, which seems so broken and so polarized. And so I'm really interested to know your all thoughts about, is there a way to bring those two polarized factions together?
Brian?
Well, that's a very big question. I mean, I think the thing that I would suggest doing is something we talked about already, which is my number one priority for democracy reform would be districting reform. Because, as I say... You're talking
about gerrymandering.
I'm talking about gerrymandering and uncompetitive districts. So you have, every election, every cycle for the House of Representatives, roughly 90% of the seats are uncompetitive. So what is the core idea of democracy? It's competition for votes. But if 90% of the seats are already decided, we've given up a lot of our democracy before we've even voted, right? But the thing is, it has ripple effects that are much more profound than that, because if you live in an uncompetitive district, you never have a politician who's driven by compromise. You have a politician that's driven by ideology, because all they have to avoid is the primary challenger. And the primary challenger emerges if you compromise. So if you imagine that the 90% goes to 60%, and now 40% of the districts are competitive, you're going to get more consensus-driven politics. You're going to get politicians who are rewarded for delivering the goods as opposed to always being, always towing the party line. So I think there are aspects of, despite the sort of rosy appeals to civic engagement, I think there are structural problems with some of our systems that have to be reinvigorated, and they have to be reformed, and we have to be creative about how to do that. Because it's not just going to go away by people saying, let's get together in a room and work this out. There are structural reasons why we have a dysfunctional system. And so the two of them go hand in hand. How do you get the reform? Well, you get people saying, actually, we agree that this is broken. And I think that's the one thing that I have found common ground with that's pretty universal, is most people think the system is not working. And they think there's something fundamentally wrong with how the democratic process works. So why do we put up with it? I mean, that's the sort of core question that I think is more important for us to think about. And I think there are ways to reinvigorate the system with structural reform that have cascading effects down to the local level and mean that you can actually solve challenges and depoliticize, depolarize some things, because the elites are right now acting as drivers that pull people apart. If you create incentives for them to push people together, that will trickle down into the voting public.
But I want to emphasize again, and this is something that Fred was speaking to, and what we're doing is opening up a space, a civic space, to come in and not have to declare your politics at the door. And then to say, I love that idea, don't know how that person, but I just think there's a lot of empowerment in that, Brian, and maybe that's where this sense of what you're saying, you've got to demand the change. I don't know, maybe that's where the flame starts. Am I being too idealistic?
No, I mean, look, I've seen some of the worst places in the world in studying authoritarian regimes and so on, and I'm still a fundamental idealist. And the reason I'm a fundamental idealist is because I think most people in the world simply want to live a good, decent life, and they often want to help others do that too. They want to empower others to do that too, whether it's their friends, their family, their community members. And I think that is a universal human trait. I mean, we're an incredibly generous species, and it's something that makes us uniquely human. We really try to help others, even when there is nothing in it for us very often. And no other species does that. So, you know, when you think about that, I think there is something that is deeply worthwhile about it. I don't think that we're going to, you know, achieve this instantly. I think this is a generational problem to reinvigorate the way we feel about our systems. But I do think the local level is where you start. Because when you have someone who is dividing people, if you push them to ask, what is the solution you're advocating for, it brings things back to a pragmatism that is so much harder to be ideological about. And so many debates around the Thanksgiving table and so on get into shouting matches when you talk about, is this person good or bad?
Right.
If you talk about what do you want to do and how do you want to fix it and what would you do if you were in charge, it starts to become more plausible to find common ground. So that's where I think, again, it's about finding the actual solution-driven aspects of this rather than saying thumbs up, thumbs down to this person.
Okay, to this question of obligation of a citizen. Sir, introduce yourself. I'll hold the mic.
My name is Chuck, and actually I'm on a local board. And on the board, there are people of different political beliefs. And on this board, we've had some practical problems to work out, to solve. And I've listened to people who I think probably have different political beliefs and I've gotten to appreciate the way they're approaching this problem. And so my experience on this board is that people of different political beliefs, we're not dealing with politics at all. We're dealing with practical problems, trying to solve them, and we've gotten along. We've reached some decisions, and I've gotten to appreciate these people. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to do with politics. It has to do with practical problems that we're trying to solve.
I'd love to react to that, because I think you've hit the nail on the head in a really important point, which is that those things should be the same. Politics has gotten confused as something that's about winning arguments. Politics is about solving problems. That is the only reason we do it. It shouldn't exist for any other reason. And so, you know, when you get to the point where you say it's not political, it's about solving problems, it's a really, I mean, it's a very insightful comment, because it's something that says, hold on, why do we do politics? And it's easy to lose sight of that if you turn on the TV and you see people shouting at each other, trying to score points. The only reason politics exists, the only reason democratic elections exist, is to decide who should be in charge and how are they going to solve the problem that we face. And, you know, it is really, I think, a very dangerous world to live in, where politics is viewed as not for that. And I think that's something that underscores the severity of the problem we face.
Sir, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Evan. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One is that it seems, as a citizen, it's very important that we are engaged in the evidence about things. And you mentioned this, that we're laboratories. Well, laboratories work on evidence. They don't work on opinions. They don't work on, conspiracies. And I really struggle with this a lot, where I hear a lot of things from people where they are not evidence-based. And you also mentioned something about, we have systemic issues in our political system and structural issues. And some of those you mentioned maybe changing the way districts are set up, but also I might mention other electoral form like ranked choice voting, which has a way of reaching a compromise in a different way by creating more incentive for people to reach the middle consensus.
Good. Do you want to say something about
Yeah,
that?
no,
I'm
I
going
mean,
to go over here.
I mean, ranked choice voting is one option. I think the point that I'm trying to make is not necessarily that I have the answer to how to fix the problem of districting or whatever. It's that if you design systems that are geared towards polarization, polarization will result. If you design systems that are geared towards compromise, compromise is more likely to result. We've designed systems that have divorced political expediency from solving problems. And that is the fundamental issue. So there's a variety of different policy ideas of how to solve that. Different communities will come up with different answers. That's fine. But I don't believe that the status quo is working for most people in not just driving consensus at the elite level, but actually then driving consensus at the local level. You actually have an incredibly divided country right now. And I don't think that's an accident. I think it's part of the fact of the way our systems are dysfunctional.
Is there anyone in the room who, and I'll get to all of this, is there anyone in the room who thought, I could volunteer for that, or I could put my name in for that, and then thought, kind of double clutched, I don't know. I see somebody nodding over there. I'm coming over to you, and you, right there, in just a minute. Ma'am, you are.
I'm Burke, and I came to Minnesota 20 years ago to study at the Center for Democracy and Citizenship, and found that in the metropolitan area we just kept studying the problem. But I did learn that associational life was really critical to vital civic engagement. And when I moved to this rural community 7 years ago, it's what struck me, that there was a vital aging network here. And that's actually the idea of a woman named Jan Hively. But this vital aging network is full of civic engagement, and it is a robust community embracing newcomers because they want to welcome people with their skills, whatever their age is. And so in terms of giving this a rural voice, I feel like it's the first time I've really understood Minnesota, was living here.
Wow, thank you. Really great observation. I want to go back over into, do you mind if I squeeze by? This is why we put people in a circle when we do this usually. All right, ma'am, I saw you nodding when I said, throw your name in, and then, do I really want that? Introduce yourself, if you will.
Yeah, my name's Celia. In my local community, it's not just me. Our city council is well known for not getting along. Not even just along political divides, just like the people don't talk well to each other. On top of that, we've got a local Facebook group that highlights all of the negative opinions or spotlights people when they make decisions or throws out conspiracy theories and things like that. So myself, other people really want to see change, but it's every time you think about it, you're like, oh shoot, do I really want to put my name out there and be a spotlight? Even though it's not on a national stage, it's on a local stage.
How old are you?
I'm 24.
Oh my gosh, Brian. So,
yeah, I mean, this is the problem. I mean, the argument that I always make to people is that if you imagine, the worst person to be in power, it's a power-hungry psychopath, right? That person is definitely going to volunteer. I guarantee you they're going to end up putting themselves in the ring. So if you don't want those people to be the ones who are in charge, everybody else needs to do their bit. Because the power-hungry psychopath is 100% going to run for office. So this is the kind of stuff where, when we look at this, we have these sort of massive numbers of people who would make incredible community leaders who are just not even in the running from the beginning because the
Like
question
Celia,
says, yes,
right?
exactly. Do you want to have power? And the answer is no, and you've taken yourself out of the running. And I'm completely sympathetic to this, right? Because the environment is so toxic and so personally destructive. And this is where I think, we also need to be extending grace to people who have, if you're getting involved with a local community, it doesn't matter if you said the wrong thing 10 years ago or had a minor, infraction. We have to be forgiving of people at the local level because we're human. We make mistakes, right? It's a different level of scrutiny if you're running for president or if you're running for Congress. If you just want to pitch in your local community, we have to make it possible for flawed individuals to do that too, right? And not just flawed individuals, but people who are worried about the costs of leadership. And these are the fundamental core issues, I think, underpinning a lot of this, is that the power-hungry people will always put their hand up. And so the question for our democracy is, are we going to make sure that enough of us put our hands up so that they don't win?
Right. I'm Kerri Miller. You're listening to Rural Voice. We are in Red Wing at the Sheldon Theater, and we're here with Brian Klaas. He's a political scientist and a writer, and we're talking about civic engagement.
Hi, I'm Meyer Beckner from lovely Red Wing. And to your question about what do we owe as individuals to our community, what makes a civic, leader or civically minded person, I think we've really lost a lot of that just from the times changing with extreme algorithms catering to people's niches, and I think in some ways that can be a good thing, and that's where people are finding community, but I also think that's really driven us apart from the physicality of community. And looking forward, I don't know if those glory days and that civic shine will necessarily return. And so I guess my question to you is, where do we find ourselves now in this moment, and how do we recapture some of that? Where do we move forward in what it means to be a community? Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily have the infrastructure, don't have the bonds that they used to, and I'm not sure if that's coming back.
Meyer, can I ask you how old you are?
I am 27.
And have you thought about involvement in, and maybe you are already involved in some kind of civic, not if it's politics, but some kind of civic organization?
Yes, I'm tuned into the community and volunteer and keep my eye on things, I guess.
Way to go. Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the little spark plugs matter enormously, because it is true, and you're pointing, by the way, to a really important aspect of this, which is the online aspect. People say things to others online that they would never say in person. I mean, it's just something where the things that people write to me, no one has ever said those things to me in person, but I get them in my inbox a lot. They always call me brain by accident, which I always take as a compliment. But it is one of those aspects where you sort of look at this and you think, okay, yeah, there's a distance between people that exists online that just doesn't exist when you're in a local community center, the grocery store line. And it's also something, I've got a little bit of distance from the US now because I've lived abroad for some time. And one of the things that really strikes you about not just America, but Minnesota in particular, is how people talk to you. The strangers talk to you. This doesn't, I can tell you in London, no one has ever talked to me in the grocery store line, and when they do, it's very weird. So, whereas here, you just have these conversations, people talk to each other. And so that baseline of the sort of community values exists. It's already here. And I think it's where the spark plugs create that locally. It's the ones where you say, hey, I've got a community group that I think would be great to have. Let's set it up. The other one that I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to mention previously is that you can create tradition around civic engagement that is really positive. And in Australia, for example, they have a national tradition where they have barbecues on election day. It's a national thing, and all the different communities get together and they vote, and then they know that they're going to be the community barbecue. Everyone gets together, and that's going to happen regardless of which way you voted. You're going to come together and celebrate democracy itself.
That is such a great idea. Right?
So it's the kind of stuff where, I don't know, you sort of think, let's do this. Let's make whatever it is that's going to be the most unique to your community. The same sort of stuff. It's barbecues in Australia. I don't know it would exactly be in Minnesota. The hot dish cook-off, whatever it is. But it is. This is the kind of stuff where it's just those little ripple effects. Let's say election day, we do a community party, and it's not a hard thing to organize.
I love that.
People have to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, who's up for that? All right, sir, you are?
I am Wayne from Rochester. And I think a good citizen should choose to actively engage with groups that they think will see things differently. For me, I am a veteran, and I meet with a lot of veterans as part of different groups, and I view things very differently than them, but I'm glad that I'm meeting with them regularly, and so I think that's good for everyone to do.
I do too, and that strikes me that feels like a place where there's a higher bond that you share, right? And you kind of push the politics aside. It's good. You were saying common language.
Yeah, a common language, a shared experience, and frankly, I think that's something that might help. It goes a little bit to the national national service. If there was a shared narrative that was still inclusive, I think that would help enormously.
Okay. Down here, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Megan Shuey, and I can bring this real hyper-local because I'm the director of Downtown Main Street here in Red Wing. Every year we put on the holiday stroll, and it attracts 22,000 people to our downtown, and it's an amazing thing. And last year, we made the decision to charge $3 for a button. And wow, was that ever a hot topic. So as an obligation of a citizen is one thing. Obligation of a citizen to come to an event is this idea of this $3 button was a way for us to help pay for costs that are a lot higher than they used to be for our event. So what happened was there was a firestorm on social media, and it was amazing to watch from afar, but also to be a part of. A key learning I had was don't be sarcastic and say that Santa doesn't like people who don't want to buy a button. You go on the naughty list. That was not maybe the best way to come out of this, but as you can see, that's kind of the way I get started. But what ended up happening that was so fascinating is there was a few people, and it really was only a few people, that really thought the $3 was extravagant. Why should I have to pay $3 to walk on the streets or to stroll on the streets that I pay for as a taxpayer? But then there were hundreds of people that came to the defense of the $3 button and how we have to pay for the things we love in our town. People went as far as to buy 100 buttons. So they spent $300 to buy 100 buttons for people that weren't maybe able to, or those people who didn't want to buy one here, I'll buy it for you. And so it became this amazing thing where we sold out of the buttons before the event because so many people were so mad at the 20 people who didn't want to buy the button that we actually had an amazing outpouring of support, and it helped me as the leader of the organization and my board understand that this is really important. But I did have to say that some of my staff, it was really hard on them to see the kinds of negativity that was talked about. So that's also kind of combining a couple of the other comments here is that social media can really be for good or for evil.
No, but Megan, I love this because we saw a problem, we had a challenge, we put a solution out there, we took the incoming, and we prevailed. And in the end, people supported it, right? I don't know, what lesson do you take from that, Brian?
Well, I think, destructive chaos agents are very loud.
Yeah.
And they're very willing
Those
to hit
20
post
people.
and publish.
Right.
And it's always important to remember that they're not the normal person. And so, I think it's a beautiful illustration of the point that citizens, I think, around the country want to do their bit. They actually, when you level with them and say, this is why we are doing this, I think most people want to feel like they're doing their bit. And for those who don't, it's the other, bigger perspective that I've had since I left Minnesota and worked in these places where democracy is gone and so on, is, my gosh, do I wish I could show those people what life is like in places where democracy has disappeared. Because the way in which there are so many people who are willing to risk their life, quite literally. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of these dissidents and so on who have been tortured trying to get elections, and to sort of suggest that being a citizen is all gravy and no work. I mean, it's there's an obligation here, and I think we have to remind ourselves that we have something incredibly, incredibly precious. Most of us want to do our bit, and for the rest, they need to sort of wake up and understand how lucky they are to be in this kind of country.
Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Janelis Jinete, and just last comment, I come from Venezuela, and I have experienced 20 years of trying to get our democracy back. It's really terrible. But my comment tonight is about our communities changing. Our communities in Minnesota are becoming more diverse, and minorities, which are the part of the diversity, are not known because they are very engaged. So we can only see or foresee that this is going to become a problem. Is there anything that we can do as a small community, a rural community, to work on that, to prevent all those growing pains, because we are just going to keep growing? What can we do as a community to work with these minority groups to get them more engaged and to be more outspoken and work with the community?
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, this is a very difficult question because, of course, you can get cultural enclaves that don't want to be as engaged or don't see themselves represented, and so they feel jaded early on. I mean, one of the lessons I worked in before I left and went abroad and became an academic and so on, I worked in Minnesota politics. And what I will say is that politicians really pay attention to who shows up. They really do, because they're rational actors, and they know that they need them to get elected. So I can tell you from personal experience, we studied the issues of communities that were clearly going to engage with the election. And it's not to say that this will be easy or it will be a straightforward process, but I think there is, a way for small groups to actually drive change, especially because, politicians are often looking to pick up those votes of new voters because they can become political forces. And of course, there's very large immigrant communities in Minnesota that have become major political forces in many elections. And I appreciate you sharing the comments about Venezuela because, of course, it's exactly the illustration of this, where once it's gone, it is very, very difficult to get back. It's so much easier to find common ground and fix the problem while the system is still functional. And so, yeah, I'm sorry what's happened to your country.
Ma'am.
My name's Gretchen, and I've lived in Red Wing my entire life. I believe your question was, what's the obligation of a citizen? And when I think of citizen, I think of every single person who lives in Red Wing. So I'm not just thinking about people in this room who are like, let's be leaders, let's be organizers. And I was thinking about, in the most basic, broad sense, a local elementary school has the motto, be safe, be kind, be responsible. And I think that is at the very base what our obligation is. Be safe, make sure that you are being safe so that other people in this in the community can walk safely and be safe. And when you see someone hurt, you help them up. Be kind to everyone, especially in our growing diverse community where you're going to see more and more people who have different backgrounds and different stories than your own. Be kind to them. They have a story that you might not understand because you've never lived in their shoes. And the third one was to be responsible. And to some of us, you were talking about evidence-based solutions. If there's a problem in the community and you have the wisdom to correct it, get involved and make sure that that evidence-based knowledge is out in the community. If your responsibility is simply by voting, be responsible. If your responsibility is, hey, I can be a part of this organization and listen and make a difference, it's going to be different for every individual, and I think we just need to realize that if we can all be safe, kind, and responsible, then, and what that means to us, then I think we can build a more positive community.
All right, we've been going for about an hour and a half. I know, time flies when you're having so much fun. So I'm going to ask for a couple more comments, and then Brian is going to do a book signing out in the lobby, and you are welcome to bend his ear some more. Although keep in mind, he is jet lagged. So I don't know what you're going to get back on that. Okay, I got a lot of people here with their hands. Who wants to say something that hasn't been said? All right, ma'am, I'm coming over there. Let me also mention that if you don't hear yourself on Tuesday, it's because we had to cut it down to 52 minutes. But the whole thing will be on the podcast, so mprnews.org. All right, Pam?
Yes, I'm Beth, and I am not a power-hungry psychopath. Just to be clear, I did put my name in to run for city council, not knowing about the Facebook page that is entirely derogatory. Might not have done it had I known that. But I did throw my hat in the ring, even though I'm retired, because I was tired of being on the sidelines. And Theodore Roosevelt made a quote that talks about getting in the ring and getting dirty. That has been my motto for my whole career. I live here, I love the town, and I'm scared, I'll be honest, about running and some of the bad things that people are saying, but I'm more excited. I'm more excited to be able to contribute. And so here we go. And I'm so glad to hear about everything that you guys have been saying. There have been some great comments, so.
Beth, way to go. Good luck. Good luck with that. That's great. Okay, couple more. I don't think I've had anybody over here. That's all right. Matt, I'm so sorry.
My name is Therese, and I moved here after college and taught in Red Wing for 33 years, and I'm on the school board right now. And I think regarding what your responsibility is as a citizen, I think that we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and having conversations that are difficult and being able to listen, which I'm working on, and don't take it personally. Listen to what other people have to say and then hear what they're saying, even if, like Gretchen said, even if it's not your experience, it's their experience. And the only way we'll come together as a diverse community is if we sit in that discomfort and use that to help us grow.
Great. I'm going to come over to Julie. Yes, Julie. Hi. Because she, first there and then to Julie. How about that? She's giving me the evil eye, like, I've had my hand up and you are not looking at me. All right. I'll sit right here. Okay, yeah. So, Joan.
Me? Yeah. I think the responsibility is to ease each other's way. And I've had to have forced vulnerability. When you're vulnerable, you have to depend on others. 2 of our children have special needs or mental health needs. And I remember thinking at one point, I am totally dependent on the village to keep my children safe. I can't do it myself. And do I trust this community that I've lived in with my children? Will they just say, oh, that child is different now, and just be quiet about it, or kind of gossip, or not do anything? Or will they reach out? They reached out. With me being vulnerable, this community has been extraordinary, so extraordinary that others have said, ours wouldn't be like that. They have made opportunities for our children and given me a perspective that it's a great gift to have those experiences with my children. It introduced me to so many different worlds. So I want to thank all the people in the room who have been involved with that, but also to say that it's made me, in the volunteer things that I do, think, who doesn't have somebody in their lives looking out for them? Who needs somebody to say hello? Who needs somebody to take them to the grocery store, or to just walk along, or just find out who they are, because we all have to keep each other safe and to feel as if we really matter to others, and not everybody has that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Julie, I always come to you for the kind of the reflection on what everybody has said. So what have you heard tonight that you want to point out?
Oh boy, I've heard Red Wing is a wonderful place. I already knew that, but yes, I knew that already. I think there's a lot of people that are scared, but there's a lot of hope as well. I think the big challenge is, what are we going to do outside of this theater? And I think a lot of it, talking about the psychopath, whatever, power-hungry person running, is and I consider myself part of it, we've let that happen. We have been apathetic towards it and said, oh, it'll fix itself. It'll fix itself. It has not fixed itself. It is now, the minority is speaking up for everybody else. And so when you're having trouble with finding people to run for city council, county commissioners, state representatives, that is a direct, correlation to that. And so I think it takes talking about this, and really outside of this theater, because obviously I think most of us that showed up tonight are fairly like-minded, and that we care about democracy and we care about our communities, but are we willing to have those difficult conversations? And maybe it's not even a difficult conversation. It's just meeting somebody that's different from you. I grew up on a dairy farm next to a town of 200 people. I never thought I would be living in Washington, D.C., taking the subway everywhere, taking the subway to church. And one of my favorite things to do was to meet new people who were exactly opposite for me. And tell me about your background. Tell me why you think this way. And I've really changed my views, policy-wise and theoretically and everything, by listening to people's stories. Because I want to know, why does this affect you? How does this affect you? And so when we talk about rural issues, I think I'm a rural person. I can speak to that. Here's my story. So I guess overall, I think the whole thing is listen, ask questions, and get out there. Get out there and be involved, and encourage others to be involved. I will also say, I noticed that even though I'm almost 50, I'm probably one of the younger ones in here. Which, thank you all very much for being here, because you have all, these generations have shown what good citizenship looks like. And I'm personally afraid of who's going to be the poll workers, who's going to be these people. I just took over being a poll worker in my little Freedom Township in Waseca County from my 92-year-old grandmother because she passed away. Wow. And so who are these people? So what can we do to get these people under the age of 50 to be involved? And I know it's because people are scared. They don't want to get yelled at, but we have to really form a community around people to be like, it's okay, we will try to protect you as much as we can outside of social media trolls.
Brian, just one closing thought or two before we go out to buy your books?
Yeah, I think that it's just one of those aspects where you never know what ripple effect your actions can have. And I think that power is actually much closer than you imagine it to be, especially when it's around local issues that you can solve. So I'd encourage anyone who is worried about the state of the world to try to do their little bit to send that ripple out that makes it a little bit better.
Hey, thank you all very, very much for coming and for your insights and your thoughts. Listen on Tuesday to NPR. You'll hear the whole conversation. And if you want more information about Rural Voice, it's ruralvoice.org. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing that. That was my pleasure. It was very fun.
You were perfect. It was perfect. Just
okay, where do I get
Thanks for coming. It was really, that was very uplifting.
Forward.
Think globally.
Act locally. There you go.
I don't think anybody knows.
It's a good motto. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.